Hello to all my dear lovely students. So once again I, Ayushi Agarwal, your botany teacher, welcomes you on this amazing platform of Physics Wallah where we are studying in excellence batch. So far we have completed the first 4 lectures of the chapter Sexual Reproduction in Flowering Plants, in which we have discussed that how male gametes are produced, how female gametes are produced, and how the male gametes packed in pollen grains are transferred by the mechanism of pollination. In pollination, you have seen 2 types of pollination, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Devices that promote self-pollination, devices that promote cross-pollination. So all those things we have seen already in the first 4 lectures. Today, we are going to study about some more agents which can help in pollination like biotic agents. Along with this, we will also cover Pollen-Pistil Interaction in our today's lecture. So without wasting time, let's directly start with the class. Now beta, in my last class, I have already told you about abiotic pollinating agents, that is wind and water. Wind pollination is known as technically anemophily, whereas water pollination is known as hydrophily. Majority of the plants, they prefer wind over water. Water pollination is restricted to 30 genera of monocots only. One more thing I told you, that even hydrophytic plants like water lily and other organisms like lotus, they being hydrophytic, they don't prefer water for pollination, rather they go for wind or biotic agents like insect for pollination. So I hope all those concepts are clear. Now today we are going to study about biotic pollination. Biotic pollination means when the transfer of gamete, male gamete, is done with the help of living organisms. These living organisms can be either insects, snails, slugs, ants, snakes, any organism. If any living organism is involved in pollination, then it is known as biotic pollination. So first point, I hope it is clear to everyone. Now, some technical terms for biotic pollination I have written. You should know all of them. It should be there on your brain. First, insect pollination is known as entomophily. Like you have seen hydrophily, like you have seen anemophily. Similarly is entomophily. Entomophily means if pollination is done via insects. Correct? Next, bird pollination. Bird pollination is technically called as ornithophily. Right? Next, ant pollination. If ants, one of the smallest organism, if they pollinate, then that pollination is known as myrmecophily. Suppose snakes, even snakes like who live on santalum, that is your chandan ka ped. So snakes can also help in pollination for specifically santalum. Then if snakes are used for pollination, then it is known as ophiophily. You know, study of snakes is also known as ophiology. So pollination via snakes is known as ophiophily. If snails and slugs are helping in pollination, then that pollination is known as malcophily. Right? One more type of pollination is there, that is pollination by bats. Bats, you know, the organisms, the mammals, right? Bats. So pollination done by bats is known as chiropterophily. So you can remember this one more. I hope all these terms are clear to each and every one of you, and you will remember all the different types of pollination done by different living organisms. Right? Now I'm going to quote some examples with which you will understand biotic pollination in a better way. But before we start with the example of biotic pollination, you should see that if plants wants to get pollinated by living organisms, then how they should get modified, how they should make themselves in order to attract these living organisms to allow pollination. First of all, beta, flowers of such plants should be very brightly colored, large and showy. Not like you have seen in wind pollinated or water pollinated plants. There you have seen that their flowers were very small, inconspicuous, not brightly colored, not showy. But if pollination has to be done via living organism, then this has to be a major modification, that flowers surely should be brightly colored. Why? Because then only the organisms will be attracted. Then only insect, suppose insect is flying, why the hell the insect will come towards the flower? It will only come towards the flower if that flower is brightly colored, if it is attracting it. So attraction is a major factor for biotic pollination. So I hope first two modification are very clear. Plus flower should also be scented. That means if suppose insect is not able to see, then at least if that organism can smell, then surely that organism is going to move towards that good smell. So yes, the flower should be scented, they should be brightly colored, right? Moving towards the third point, pollen grains, beta, unlike that you have seen in anemophily, they are non-sticky so that they can easily float in the wind. But here, pollen grains needs to be sticky so that if insect sits on the flower for an instant, then these pollen grain should get stuck on their bodies. And when the insects fly away, pollen grains are also carried away along with them. So pollen grains needs to be sticky and should be produced in large number. Why? Because beta, insects come, sometimes insect eats pollen grain. Now suppose if limited number of pollen grains are produced, then how the plant is going to manage, how the flower is going to manage, because yes, pollen grains will be eaten by the insect, some pollen grains will get dusted here and there, and then only some pollen grains will reach to their destination. In that case, pollen grains should also be produced in large number. This is also one of the modification of plants who wants to get pollinated by animals or by biotic agents. Correct? Next point, very, very important. In biotic pollination, beta, the plants who are waiting for living organisms to come and pollinate them, then those plants should also give rewards to these living organisms. See, once insect can get attracted to the good smell, once insect can get attracted to the brightly colored flower, but to call that insect again and again for pollination, plant need to give them something as a reward, as a gift. Yes or no? Like in us also, beauty attracts once or twice. Suppose there's a very pretty actress, right? And she does not know how to act. Correct? So, okay, just to enjoy beauty, you can watch her film once or twice. But if she's not doing good acting, if she's not giving you something in return in the form of entertainment, then you're not going to go and watch her movie for the thrice or for the fourth time. You will only go to the theater if that actress is beautiful plus giving good content, if giving good entertainment, if she's acting also well. So that is the reward, isn't it? So similarly in plants also, beta, if suppose plants only have attractive flowers, so once insect will get attracted, twice the insect will get attracted, thrice time insect will get bored, will say, okay, I know this flower is beautiful, but what is the point of visiting again and again when I'm not getting anything in return? So third time plant won't get pollinated. In that case, if plant wants to maintain that relationship of pollination with the insect, then plants need to offer those insects something. And what is that? First, I have already told you, food. Beta, insects, they feed on the pollen grains. That is why I told you that pollen grains should be produced in large amount so that they can also become the food of the insect who is coming to pollinate them. Plus, they can get carried away along with them also. So first reward is the food itself, which is given to them in the form of pollen grains plus nectar. You know, honeybee visits flower for their nectars. So nectar is also very, very important. Food is pollen plus nectar. Right? Apart from giving food, apart from serving them with pollens and nectar, some plants also offer safe place to lay eggs. Insects can visit these flowers, can lay their eggs and just get relaxed because the flower of the plant is going to take care of their eggs. In that case also, insect will keep on visiting such flowers because whenever insect wants to lay eggs, will visit these flowers, will lay eggs. If they will lay egg, they will come in contact with the flower. So they will carry the pollen grains also. And this is going to become a mutual association. Correct? Yes or no? Are all the first points which are written clear to everybody? The modification observed in plants which wants to get pollinated by living organisms. Okay, some examples are here. Let's try to understand the first example, that is relationship between fig plant and fig wasp. This is beta a mutual association where plant and insect are 100% dependent on each other for their survival. How? Just check this. Fig and fig wasp. Fig wasp is the insect which pollinates the flower. Right? And fig wasp, why it is coming and pollinating the fig flower? Because it is also getting the safe place to lay eggs. Safe place to lay eggs. So this is a kind of mutual association which you see between the fig flower and the fig wasp. It is a mutual association. That means if one organism get extinct, the other organism will automatically get extinct beta. Their survival is only when they both are existing on earth. One gets extinct, other automatically dies. So this is how mutual association is playing important role over here. Now see what happens. Beta, fig flower is not the simple kind of a rose flower. Rather, fig flower is a complete inflorescence in itself called hypanthodium. So this is the flower, this is whole inflorescence. The flower is actually whole inflorescence by the name hypanthodium. Correct? This hypanthodium is having an opening called ostiole. Now, about the opening in the flower is only known to fig wasp. The only insect who knows the secret of fig flower, that it has an opening, the only insect which knows it is fig wasp. Right? So what happens? Suppose this is a fig wasp. So this is the fig wasp who knows the way to enter inside the hypanthodium, which is the flower, which is the inflorescence of fig. Now this hypanthodium beta consists of what? They consist of male flowers. Lower side they have female flowers. And in between they have neutral flowers, also called as gall flowers. Correct? And this is the stalk with which they are attached to. Now, what happens beta when this organism fig wasp enters inside the hypanthodium to lay its egg? Now, once they will come, what they will do? They will lay the eggs. Now, okay, laying is done. Now, when they will return back, beta, they will carry the pollen grains from the male flower, which are located on the upper side of the hypanthodium. So, fig came inside the hypanthodium with the purpose of laying eggs. But unknowingly, when it is coming out, it took the pollen grains on the back, because surely, while it is going to enter inside, the fig wasp is going to come in contact with the male flower. Male flower is ready with the pollen grains. They will dust their pollen grains on the back of the fig wasp. Now what happens? Fig wasp is carrying its pollen grain, is carrying the pollen grain of fig. Now they are flying. Now they will find another hypanthodium. Now they will enter inside that hypanthodium. While they will enter inside, they will dust the pollen grains and they are going to fall on the female flowers, which are located towards the base of the hypanthodium. So like this, pollination is also done, as well as safe place to lay eggs is also done. So fig wasp also happy, fig plant also happy. Now these eggs, what they will do? They will simply grow inside the hypanthodium. The organism, the new baby fig wasp, will feed on these gall flowers. They will grow and again they will go back. Once they will also go back, they will carry more pollen grain on their back. Right? So pollen grains on baby fig wasp went. Now these baby fig wasp are also carrying the pollen grains, which can they dust again inside the another hypanthodium. So like this, there is a mutual association between fig and fig wasp. If one extincts, the other is automatically going to get extinct. So this is how the mutual relationship between the two organisms exists. Correct? And this is one of the best example to understand the mutual relationship plus biotic pollination. Understood? Similarly, beta, there is one more example of yucca moth. Yucca is actually a flower and it's very long flower, and it is getting pollinated in the same manner with the help of a moth called Pronuba moth. Correct? So yucca is a plant which is getting pollinated by Pronuba moth. Same concept as you have seen in fig and fig wasp. Exactly the same concept. What is the concept, beta? This Pronuba moth is pollinating the plant. In return, yucca is giving Pronuba safe place to lay eggs. So they also have a kind of mutual association, right? Same as fig wasp. This is second example, yucca and Pronuba moth. This you have seen, beta, where both insect and plant are equally benefiting each other. They are equally helping each other, and yes, they are surviving. Somewhere you find that plants try to act smarter. They want that, okay, insects should pollinate them, but in return they do not want to give them any benefit. Such is known as deceitful pollination. Deceitful means cheated pollination. See, example is one orchid and a moth. Now see, one orchid is Ophrys and the moth which does this is Colpa moth. Ophrys cheats Colpa moth for getting pollinated. So this comes under the example of deceitful pollination. The two examples which I already told you between fig wasp, Pronuba moth and yucca are mutual pollination, where both the organisms are getting equal benefit. But the third example which I am going to tell you is where the plant is getting the benefit but not the insect. here plant is going to cheat the insect. See how? Okay, so Ophrys and Colpa moth. See, this is the orchid Ophrys. Ophrys is basically one of the orchids, you know now, orchids. Yes. So, suppose this is my orchid flower. Right? Now, beta, one of the petal of Ophrys, resembles the female Colpa. One of the petal of Ophrys resembles what? Female Colpa. Now what will happen, beta? Suppose this is the petal which resembles female Colpa. Now somewhere the male Colpa is flying. So this is the male Colpa. Now male Colpa from the top, what this fellow is going to feel? That, oh, my partner, my mating partner is sitting on this flower. So in search of its mating partner, this male Colpa will come towards the flower, will try to pseudo-copulate with this petal. Now it is pseudo-copulation. This Colpa is not getting benefit. Rather, this Colpa is getting cheated. Sexual deceit. Deceit means, beta, cheating. And why is it sexual deceit? Because this male Colpa is invited by the flower when flower resemble its sexual partner, its female Colpa. Now, this male Colpa is going to come near to the flower, but it will try to copulate. However, it will be a pseudo-copulation. Now, this is not going to get any benefit. Okay, nor even at loss, neutral. However, the flower will get the benefit and flower will get pollinated. So what have you seen? That the insect came and pollinated the plant but did not get any benefit. Rather got fooled by the flower. Yes or no? Correct? Understood? Now beta, one more thing. Suppose female Colpa changes its shape, color or anything. So accordingly, this petal of the Ophrys also has to change. If suppose it does not change according to the female Colpa, then surely next time male Colpa will not come for copulation, will not get, will not get deceived by the appearance of the petal of Ophrys, right? Therefore, this is also an example of co-evolution where the female Colpa, where the petal of the Ophrys has to change according to the female Colpa. So, if female Colpa evolves, accordingly, the Ophrys has to also evolve. So, two organisms are evolving together. So, therefore, it is also known as co-evolution. Understood everyone? Yes or no? So how are you going to write this? That why it is sexual deceit or co-evolution? Chalo, see how will you write sexual deceit or co-evolution? Since, or there only I'll write, one of the petal of Ophrys resembles female Colpa which attracts male Colpa for pseudo-copulation. Why am I saying pseudo-copulation? Because copulation is not happening. Still male Colpa is getting attracted, right? So yes, which attracts male Colpa for pseudo-copulation. However, it gets pollinated, but there is no benefit to the male Colpa. So one of the petal of Ophrys resembles female Colpa which attracts male Colpa for pseudo-copulation, thus gets pollinated without giving any benefit to the insect. Correct? So this is sexual deceit. Now why is it co-evolution? What will you write for this thing? Now check out. Co-evolution means both female colpa and the petal of Ophrys will co-evolve in order to maintain this pollination. Understood, everybody? Yes or no? So in order to maintain the pollination, if female colpa modifies, surely the Ophrys petal has to also modify. Suppose it does not happen, suppose male-female colpa gets modified, but the petal remains the same, so surely male colpa will not get deceted, will not get cheated, and Ophrys will not get pollinated. As a result, the population of Ophrys is going to then fall, because of no pollination, no fertilization, no new organisms. Understood? So 3 examples we have done, where 2 are of mutual association, 1 is of sexual deceit or co-evolution. Now 3rd example is where insect is doing the cheating with the plant. Here you have seen that plant is doing the cheating with the insect. How? Calling the insect without giving them the benefit, itself gets pollinated. Now in the next example, I am going to tell you that how insect cheats the plant. That is, insects takes away the nectar, takes away their everything but from the plant, but without pollinating them. This is called as pollen robbery. Now example is Bombus affinis and Aquilegia flower. Queen bee, Bombus affinis and Aquilegia. Now beta, see, Aquilegia is the plant which is producing nectaries. Nectaries are the gland in which nectars are produced. So yes, plants are producing nectar only for the insect in the form of a reward, because plant wants ki okay, let insect come, take away the nectar, but along with that take my pollen grains also, please pollinate me. That is the aim of Aquilegia. However, Bombus affinis simply steals their nectar without pollinating them. So this is called as robbery, pollen robbery, in the sense they are stealing the product of Aquilegia without helping them, without pollinating them. Right? So this example also you have to remember. I'll tell you what is there in this. The insect steals the nectar of the plant without pollinating them. Correct? So this is robbery. So how many examples you have studied in biotic pollination? 4. 2 are of mutual association, that is fig, fig wasp, yucca and pronuba moth. 1 example you have studied of deceit, cheating only, but where plant is cheating the insect, that is sexual deceit or co-evolution, Ophrys and colpa moth. 4th is also cheating, but here insect is cheating the plant, that is called as robbery. Robbery of nectars produced by the plant for the sake of pollination, but the insect is not doing it, only stealing away their nectars. Right? Now, these are some examples which I have told you. 2 to 3 examples are given in your NCERT also. Like for example, lizards, they pollinate the flax tree. Then there's a gecko lizard which pollinates the flax seeds and flax plant. And many more examples are given in NCERT, which yes, you can go through them. Just read it once. Okay. Now, moving ahead, pollination is done, beta. Now you imagine that on the stigma pollen grain has landed. Now what will happen? So now there will be the next step, that is pollen-pistil interaction. As soon as the pollen grain lands on stigma, there is some exchange of chemical dialogue between the stigma, that is the receptor, and the pollen grain. Bachcho, understand this one thing. If suppose pollen grain has landed on stigma, that is not going to guarantee 100% successful pollination, because there may be some other species of pollen grain which has landed on stigma, because it is completely a random process. Any insect is visiting any flower, sitting on any flower, dropping the pollen grain, carrying the pollen grain. So it is a very rare thing that if pollen grain has landed on stigma, they are successful. That means if pollen grain start forming the pollen tube. Correct? So next is pollen-pistil interaction. What pollen-pistil interaction means? The successful landing of pollen grain on the stigma. Correct? That means if pollen grain has landed on the stigma, first of all, there will be some exchange of chemical dialogues. Stigma is going to ensure that whether the pollen grain that has landed is of right type or not. So there will be compatibility test. So if once the pollen grain passes that compatibility test, then only pollen grain will allow the growth of pollen tube. That is called as successful pollination. Thousands of pollen grains, they fall on stigma, but all does not get chance of germination, because so many pollen grains, they get rejected by the stigma. Stigma says, oh God, this is not of our species. It is not compatible for us. So first point, what are we going to write? As soon as pollen grain lands on stigma, there is exchange of chemical dialogues between them. Chemical dialogues means stigma is going to ensure, that is, stigma is going to check pollen grain for its compatibility. Pollen grain for its compatibility. Correct? Now, once if pollen grains are suppose stigma checks the pollen grains, and there's some it's all under genetic control. There are S genes called self-incompatibility genes, which are responsible for checking that whatever pollen grains have landed, are they of correct nature or not. If pollen grains, they pass the test, then what happens? See, first I'm going to write all the points and then I'll draw the diagram. Okay, so once the pollen grain passes the test, once pollen grain clears the test of stigma, immediately out of the two synergids, one of the synergid gets degenerated. So second point is, as soon as pollen grains passes the test of stigma, out of the two synergids, one of the synergid gets degenerated. One of the synergid gets degenerated and start releasing chemical. And start releasing chemical. Next point. Now, pollen grain has successfully passed the test. One of the synergid got degenerated. So now what will happen? The intine of the pollen tube will bulge out to form pollen tube through one of the germ pores. Correct? So this is the intine which came out through one of the germ pore to form pollen tube. Now, as intine is going to bulge out, all the cytoplasm, active cytoplasm which was there will get concentrated at the tip. So the tip of the pollen grain will have active cytoplasm. Behind this active cytoplasm will be vegetative cell, also called as tube cell. Vegetative cell, if you remember, the larger irregular shaped cell rich in food reserve, which is known as vegetative cell. Vegetative, also called as tube cell. And behind this will be your smaller spindle shaped generative cell. Clear? Now this is for majority of the angiosperm, for 60% of the families where shedding of pollen grain occurred at two-celled condition. However, in remaining 40% of the families, shedding occurs at three-cell stage because there this generative cell divides to form two male gametes. But I am talking about the majority. So my pollen grain was initially, when landed on stigma, was at two-celled condition. So those two cells are vegetative and generative. Clear till here? Yes or no? Now beta, let me write this in theory also. So successful pollination will induce the formation of pollen tube. Formation of pollen tube. Correct? First 3 points understood. Chalo. Now let me draw the diagram first, beta. So this is my stigma style and this is the ovary. Right? Yes or no? Stigma. Here pollen grain landed. Successful landing is done. Let me label it. So this is the stigma. This is the style. You know, style can be either hollow or solid. And this is the base, swollen base called ovary, inside which there is a integumented megasporangium called ovule, where 7-celled 8-nucleate most common type of embryo sac having the female gamete is waiting for the pollen grain to enter and to help in fertilization. Now this is the whole picture. Now as soon as beta successful pollination takes place, I already told you one of the synergid out of the two is going to get degenerated. You know, filiform parrot is also there. One of the synergid will get degenerated. So I have marked it with yellow. One of the synergid has gone degenerated, and what it has started releasing? Chemicals. Why chemical? Because those chemicals are going to attract pollen tube towards the style. Now, pollen tube formation is here. Active cytoplasm, nucleus, vegetative cell and tubes, generative cell. Now, this pollen tube is going to grow in the style in the presence of the chemical which are released by synergids. So, next point is pollen tube will grow down the style, will grow down in the style due to chemotropism. Chemotropism means beta movement of pollen tube in response to the chemicals released by synergids. Take. Now this pollen tube is going to grow. As it is going to grow in the style, the generative cell, next point is, meanwhile it is growing, meanwhile the pollen tube is growing in the style, generative cell will divide to produce two male gametes, two non-motile male gametes. Now how many cells will be there in this pollen tube beta? Active cytoplasm, tube cell and two male gametes. Right? Yes or no? This is the tube cell. Understood? Now, style is crossed. This pollen tube is going to enter in the ovary. From the ovary, it wants to enter inside the ovule. Now, entry of pollen tube inside the ovule can be done through three ways. One is through the top. Now, you know this ovule is placed in inverted manner. The embryo sac is in inverted manner. Correct? So, the above end, which is actually micropyle, is present at the base. And the lower end, which is chalaza, is actually placed at the top because you know ovule is anatropous. So this is actually your chalaza now of the ovule, and the lower base here is micropyle. I think you know the polarity is reverse. Now this pollen tube can enter inside the ovule through three ways. Number one is directly through the chalaza. Number second is through integuments. Here are the integuments. So second is the entry through this way, through integument. This is number one entry. This is number two entry. And third entry of pollen tube inside the ovule is through micropyle, that is through the base. Right? So next point is entry of pollen tube inside the ovule can be from three directions. Number one is chalaza, which is known as chalazogamy. So A is known as chalazogamy. B is through integuments. If pollen tube enters through integument, then that is known as mesogamy. And the third is porogamy. Porogamy means beta entry through micropyle. This is the most common entry. This is the most common entry. This third is most common. Why most common? Because now the pollen tube has just entered the ovule. Its aim is to enter inside the embryo sac where female gamete is waiting for the male gamete. Now beta, inside ovule, pollen tube can enter through three ways. But to enter inside the embryo sac, the only entry is micropyle. Therefore, even if pollen tube enters from the top, it has to come down. It has to come down to the micropyle. Suppose even if the pollen tube has entered through integuments, but still it has to grow to the micropyle. So anyhow, the pollen tube has to come to the base. So why not to enter through the base only? That is why the most common path of entry inside the ovule is also porogamy. So now what will be the next point, beta? Okay, let me add one page first. So next point will be entry. Now, entry inside the embryo sac is only done through micropyle. Therefore, it is the most common entry. Where synergids, the degenerated synergid, the filiform apparatus of the degenerated synergid will let the pollen tube enter inside. Chalo, I'll draw this. So this is my ovule. Correct? Yes or no? Inside this ovule, there is embryo sac. Now, this is the chalazal end. This is the micropylar end. Now, pollen tube has just entered, which is carrying 2 male gametes. Suppose porogamy is done, correct? Now, this pollen tube wants to enter inside the embryo sac where central cell and female gamete are waiting for fertilization. See, this is my degenerated synergid. Can you see? I have drawn it. In dotted manner, and this is the filiform apparatus. Correct? Now, what will happen? This pollen tube will come in contact with the micropylar embryo sac. There will be a friction between the pollen tube and the tip of the pollen tube and the embryo sac, because of which the tip of the pollen tube will get ruptured, thus dissolving the cytoplasm and the tube cell. And now both the male gametes from here, now they will come in contact, they will get dissolved, and now what will happen? Both these male gametes through the synergids will be discharged inside the embryo sac. So what will be the next point, beta? The next point is going to be, okay, now pollen tube when touches the embryo sac, due to friction, the tip of the tube ruptures, comma, vegetative cell dissolve, cytoplasm dissolve, degenerates and releasing the 2 male gametes inside the embryo and releasing the 2 male gametes inside the embryo sac. Till here is your pollen-pistil interaction. Pollen-pistil interaction simply means all the events which starts as soon as the pollen grain lands on the stigma till the pollen tube enters inside the ovule. So this is all about your pollen-pistil interaction. So how will you define pollen-pistil interaction? Pollen-pistil interaction means events from pollen landing on stigma till pollen tube enters inside the ovule, not embryo sac, till the pollen tube enters inside the ovule. So all those events till here are called as pollen-pistil interaction. Now the two male gametes are there in the embryo sac, out of which the one is going to fertilize with the female gamete to form the zygote. This event is known as syngamy, and second is going to fuse with the diploid secondary cell to form the triploid endosperm. This is known as triple fusion. Syngamy, triple fusion together is known as double fertilization. Double fertilization, beta, it is a unique property only of angiosperms, and it was reported by Strasburger. Correct? Yes or no? Chalo. Okay, double fertilization. So what is double fertilization? Basically, two events together. Triple fusion and syngamy. This is unique to angiosperms. No other plant group in plant kingdom shows double fertilization. It is the most advanced feature which is seen in most evolved group of plants, that is angiosperms. Right? Now, what is syngamy and what is triple fusion? Syngamy, if I talk about beta, syngamy simply means male gamete, haploid male gamete fertilizes with the haploid female gamete to form the diploid zygote, which later will develop into embryo. This is syngamy. What is triple fusion? Bachcho, triple fusion simply means first, it is done in two steps. Number one, when two haploid polar nuclei fuses to form diploid secondary cell or central cell, large central cell. This is the first step of triple fusion, where two haploid polar nuclei first they fuse. Now in second step, this central or secondary diploid cell is going to fuse with another haploid male gamete to form nutritive triploid endosperm. Nutritive triploid endosperm. Understood? So what is syngamy, beta? Syngamy simply means formation of zygote, and triple fusion means formation of endosperm. So this is syngamy, this is triple fusion. Triple fusion, triple why? Because three cells are fusing. First, two polar nuclei and then male gamete. So here three cells are fusing, so triple fusion. Syngamy, you know, is zygote formation. Together both the events, double fertilization. It is a unique property of angiosperms. I hope pollen-pistil interaction, all the biotic pollination and concept of double fertilization is clear to each and every one. It is nutritive. Now, what is endosperm? How zygote acts? These all things we are going to discuss in our next lecture. I hope things are so far clear to each and every one of you. Whatever we have done, that what is double fertilization, what is triple fusion, what are pollen-pistil interaction, and so on. If they are really clear to you, then I want you all to do these questions as homework. So this is your homework number 1 and this is your homework number 2. So please students, make sure that you are studying seriously, you are doing the work given to you on daily basis, reading NCERT, and yes, focusing on your studies. So if you are doing so, you are very good. Thank you for joining me. See you in the next lecture. Bye-bye everyone. Take care.